What if I told you that a tiny rocky island off Nova Scotia's south coast once had its own flag, passport, navy, and constitution, and nearly started an international incident with the Soviet Union? It sounds impossible, but the Principality of Outer Baldonia was real. Imagine sailing through the waters off southwestern Nova Scotia and coming upon a tiny rocky island in the Tuscan Islands. No town, no roads, no farms, just a windswept rock surrounded by the Atlantic Ocean. Now imagine that this little island has its own flag, passports, constitution, and government. Even more surprising, imagine that it once declared war on the Soviet Union. Well, that sounds like fiction, but this is a strange but true story. This is a story of the Principality of Outer Baldonia. The story begins in the late 1940s with a wealthy American businessman and sport fisherman named Russell Arundel. Arundel was an avid tuna fisherman who frequently visited the waters off southwestern Nova Scotia, which was famous for producing some of the largest bluefin tuna in the world. During one of his fishing trips, he became interested in a small island known as Outer Bald Tuscan Island. The island was little more than a rocky outcrop with a bit of grass on the top, but it offered a perfect retreat for fishermen seeking adventure and solitude. So in 1948, Arundel purchased the island and built a stone fishing lodge there. At first, it was simply a private getaway where he and his friends could gather to fish, relax, tell stories after a long day on the water. But somewhere between the tuna fishing and storytelling, someone had an idea. What if the island became its own country? What started as a joke quickly grew into something much larger. Arundel and his friends declared the island to be the Principality of Outer Baldonia. Naturally, every principality requires a government. So soon there was a flag. They developed passports. Anyone who caught and landed a tuna weighing more than 100 pounds and paid a $50 fee could become a prince. Considering the size of bluefin tuna in Nova Scotia waters, that was a challenge many fishermen were eager to accept, and many fishermen accomplished. The new nation even developed its own Charter of Rights. The Outer Baldonian Constitution focused heavily on the rights and freedoms of fishermen. It banned taxes, women, politics, war, nagging, and shaving. And it guaranteed a fisherman the right to lie and be believed, the right to swear, drink, and gamble, and the right to stay up all night. All this was created with a healthy dose of humor and all-in fun. Until Arundel listed the island's embassy in the Washington, D.C. telephone directory, which soon attracted international attention. Newspapers found the story irresistible, and the tiny micronation's existence was reported around the world. Reporters loved the idea of a tiny kingdom perched on a rocky island off Nova Scotia with its somewhat barbaric Charter of Rights. The Principality of Outer Baldonia became unexpectedly famous, and then things became even stranger. During the early years of the Cold War, a Soviet newspaper reporter criticized the Outer Baldonian Charter and Arundel for trying to, quote, turn his subjects into savages, unquote. To Soviet writers, the document represented the sort of individualism and freedom that clashed with communist ideals. Most people would have just laughed that off and ignored the criticism, but the princes of Outer Baldonia chose a different response. Rather than backing down, They declared war on the Soviet Union. Yes, a self-declared nation consisting of a tiny fishing lodge on a remote Nova Scotia island announced that it was at war with one of the most powerful countries on Earth. Obviously, no battles followed, no fleets were launched, no shots were fired, mostly because the fishermen went back to fishing and drinking. The conflict existed mainly in letters, newspaper stories, and public imagination. Still, the declaration generated headlines and ensured that Outer Baldonia would become one of the most unusual footnotes in the Cold War. For a brief moment, a handful of fishermen on a rocky island in the Atlantic found themselves making international news. As the years passed, interest in the Principality gradually faded. The joke had run its course, and the kingdom itself slowly slipped into history. Eventually, ownership of the island was transferred to the Nova Scotia Bird Society, and the lodge fell into disrepair. Today, Outer Baltusket Island remains a remote and windswept place, known more for its seabirds and rugged beauty than for any international diplomacy. Yet the story lives on. It reminds us that history is not always shaped by kings, presidents, and armies. Sometimes it's shaped by fishermen with a sense of humor, a love of the sea, and a willingness to dream a little bit unusual. And perhaps that's why the story of Outer Baldonia still captures our imagination. Because for a few remarkable years, a tiny island off Nova Scotia convinced the world that it was a kingdom. And somehow the world played along. Thank you for watching. If you enjoy stories of Nova Scotia's forgotten history, shipwrecks, legends, unusual characters, please subscribe to World of the Lost and join me on my next adventure into the past. Until next time, stay curious.